Hello, thank you for joining us today. I know some of you are just getting logged in right now, but I'm going to get us started. It is 3 o'clock. I'm Teresa Lyson, a business solutions consultant here at NICC, and I'm excited today to bring our second webinar in the Instructor Webinar series. We will be offering these free 30-minute webinars on the second Monday of each month, and we hope you can continue to join us. Watch NICC BCS on social media and e-newsletters for future webinars. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared. Today, we will hear from Paulette Milewski, who will talk about managing the people side of change. Paulette brings energy and 25 plus years of experience in leadership, sales, and customer service, making training workshops interactive and enjoyable. Through storytelling, real-life examples, and thought-provoking dialogue, her workshops provide participants with practical applications. Paulette has facilitated training with clients in transportation, construction, manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, consumer products and services, utilities, colleges and universities, and financial services. She earned her master's degree in organizational leadership from St. Ambrose University and is certified to facilitate Real Colors personality profile and disc work style assessment. But her favorite title is Busha, which is Polish nickname for grandma. If you have any questions throughout Paulette's presentation, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will save time at the end of the webinar to answer those. And with that, I will turn it over to Paulette.
Well, thank you, Teresa. And thanks NICC for hosting today. This is one of my favorite topics because it is constant. Change is constant. And whenever there is a change in the workplace, there's a dip in performance or some negative impact. It's bound to happen. So we're not going to stop the dip. However, our goal should be able to shrink that dip in performance. I have found that often organizational change focuses on the business case, the process, the systems, the technology, and it doesn't pay close enough attention to the psychology of those impacted. In this webinar, we are going to explore ways to minimize that emotional distress and the resistance that comes in response to change. So we're going to learn some strategies to understand and overcome that resistance so that we can gain some buy-in and some commitment. I was thinking back on my career, and there were three things that came to mind. And they were probably because they were the largest change initiatives I was part of in my career. Twice I've held jobs that nobody else had held before me. So there's a lot of change that comes with this. How does this new role interface? Are there any duplication of duties that we need to take a closer look at? Communicating its value. So holding a new role that nobody else has had was one example. And then I was on the ground floor of starting a very innovative nonprofit. And I'm proud to say 25 years later, it's still going strong. And probably one of the most longest change initiatives I had been part of was we had services that were assigned to specific cost centers, and we extracted them under one umbrella so that they became a cross-functional shared service. And because it impacted so many people in so many departments, that was a pretty large change initiative. So I think it's good that we think back on changes that we've experienced so that we have some context as we talk through today about how to manage the human dynamic of change. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to explore how to make the most of change when it impacts us and take into account not only that process piece, but also that personnel piece so that people don't just make it through, but they flourish as a result. So if you're new to using Zoom, if you toggle your mouse, a toolbar will appear. And in that toolbar, you'll see this icon that's displayed on the bottom right-hand corner that says chat with a caret. I would invite you right now to take the time and this opportunity for a few words or phrases, to type a few words or phrases that come to mind when you think of organizational change. A lot of people said hard, fearful, stressful, disruptive. Yes, all things that are the feelings, new ideas, love that, uncertainty, progress, at the same time, anxiety, improvement, at the same time, challenges, competitiveness, aversion, opportunity, resistance, growth, at the same time, challenges, errors, unsure, consequences, huge variety of words coming through. Absolutely hitting the spot. Getting everybody on board, making sure they understand why. That's a huge aspect. Innovating. Lots of great words associated, both positive and negative, which is a good point. And we're going to dig into that a little bit later. So thanks for giving us, I like to know a little bit about where people's thoughts are in association to this topic. The next thing I invite you to do is also to use your chat and consider some examples. I gave you mine. New roles, cross-functional team, a brand new business. What are examples in the past that you've experienced? And if you can capture it in a phrase or two, promotion, restructuring, whatever it might be, launch of new software. Maybe in the past, maybe something currently, also while being mindful of confidentiality, or something that you're planning for and anticipating. What are some examples, if you could place it in the chat, of workplace changes that you're experiencing? New procedures, new software system, and oh, new management, CEO, staff, new services, a new brand, restructuring, rebranding. Again, new leadership, ADP change, new management, new systems. So change in people, change in systems, change in procedures, upgrades, new and improved. All excellent examples. So it's good to have those in your mind as we go through this and think about different ways of managing the human dynamic as we plan for and anticipate. So let's look at not only how people react to the change itself, but more so, how can we help them respond to the transition that leads up to that change event? We really want to minimize the reaction, that knee-jerk reaction, and increase our response. So we're going to take a look at the change adoption curves. This is a bell curve. As bell curves, there's the majority in the middle. So we've got our innovators coming in at the beginning here, 2.5% of people. Our early adopters at 13.5%. Our early and late majority combined, 68%. And then our laggards at the tail end there of 16%. Our innovators, these are our dreamers. These are our originators of ideas. These are our friends and family that have the latest and greatest iPhones, and our colleagues. Latest and greatest new technology. Maybe they own a Tesla. If they haven't, you bet they've probably test drove one. They want to know what the cutting edge of innovation is. They are always pushing the envelope. Right behind them is our early adopters. Those are people who know a good idea when they see it, and they're jumping on board. Next up, our early majority, or what we call our middle adopters, they're going to respond to the opinions of others. So a few people are going to try it before them, but they'll come around. And then we move into our late majority, and they're the last group to endorse an idea. And they might even speak against it. They need more time, more evidence, more testimonials, more proof. They'll come around and buy in, but they're going to be needing more time than the rest. And then 16%, 16% is just always going to be against it. There are laggards. They often create division in the organization. So as leaders, as people who inspire others, it is, and others influence others, it is important to know that there's going to be some portion of the workforce that is just not on board. And in fact, last week I was with a manufacturer and we were talking about leadership and we brought up change. And one person in the room said, "That's me. I'm the laggard." And he and his boss laughed. They said, "Yep, absolutely. 100%. He hates change. He knows he resists. So at least he's got that self-awareness." I had appreciation for that. So I'm curious, where do you fall? Use your chat. Where do you think you are at? And I will tell you this, generally speaking, most of the time in the workplace, where do you fall? Because I think that I'm pretty flexible. I embrace change. I can adapt. I think generally speaking, I'm early majority. So that's what I would type. But I got to tell you, when it comes to technology, I'm not always the first. I'm probably late majority when it comes to technology. I'm a little last. It's not as intuitive for me. I want to be really sure of myself so I'm not overwhelmed. So I kind of have two answers there. But I think it's great for people to do a little self-assessment on where they think they are. So seeing a lot in that majority space, which would make sense. It would serve true of a bell curve. So your outcomes in that really don't surprise me much. What the key here is when we are inviting people to change, as to do exactly that, to invite them, to lead by asking who wants to help? How are you going to help? What are you willing to do to get things done today to move the needle a little closer? Often we tell and direct and allocate and budget. And while all those things have to happen as well, this human dynamic is this idea of inviting and questioning and eliciting people's buy-in. So I loved this picture. Change is a lot of chance. And this abyss, I think the visual on this is just awesome. Because here's the thing, when you get there, people are like, oh, now I'm not as fearful. I know what it's all about. I have an understanding. The unknowns are pretty much gone after you get through the event. It's this leading up, this transition that really feels sometimes like a free fall because change is something that happens to people, even if they don't agree with it. So the idea of this transition, it's internal. It's what happens in people's minds and hearts as they're going through the change. The change event can happen quickly, while the transition is usually a little bit more slow. So when we compare transition to change, another difference is people sometimes will react to change, but hopefully they'll respond to the transition. Because the transition, by definition, is a process, a psychological reorientation as someone comes to terms with the new details of the situation that change brings about. So it's this internal reorientation. So we're going to focus on the internal, not the processes, but rather the people. And one way to focus on the people is to do a change readiness survey. So let's say I'm in a leadership position at an organization where you work, and I'm announcing that there's going to be a restructure of the organizational chart. So new roles and responsibilities are going to be rolled out. If I were to do a change readiness survey, in the chat, please advise me of what do you think I need to know? What do I need to assess about people with regard to this organizational restructuring that's pending? What kinds of things do I need to know? In the chat, let's see what people are saying. What do you think I need to gauge and understand about those folks that will be impacted? I need to understand what they think, why. I might need to understand their reactions. I might need to understand how they communicate best. I might need to understand their personality. I need to understand what questions they have. I need to answer what's in it for them. I love that. How do they feel? What do they already know? What do they think could improve? What's their vision of this change? All excellent insights. That is exactly the kinds of things that a change readiness survey will assess. Skills, abilities, motivation, perception, behavior. So I'm curious, yes or no? Also using the chat. Have you ever implemented a change readiness survey or participated in one? Implemented or participated, yes or no? Change readiness survey. Okay. I think I saw one yes so far. Two yeses. Participated, so three. Just a bull rush to change. Yeah, we've had that for sure. So maybe four yeses. So some of us have, but I would say it's the minority of people on this webinar today. So when we think about strategies of initiating change, this is one way to help get buy-in. what these change readiness surveys can help us is one, validate the need, to confirm that a need exists. Number two, a change readiness survey can help us understand the fears, just as people said in the chat, so that we can address what's in it for them and help with buy-in and motivation. So it's about the communication techniques to address their fears, what's in it for them, and we can help identify some of the things we talked about in the chat, the communication channels, how can we manage the risk? How can we address those stakeholders? So organizationally, it helps us understand the environment, the culture, the capacity of resources, both managerially and organizationally, to help build resistance. So if we were in a workshop outside of this brief webinar today, we would dig more into what kinds of questions might you ask on a change readiness survey. A lot of these ideas and the difference between the concept of change and transition comes from this book by William Bridges. William Bridges was a business consultant, an author, and a speaker on change. And his model's used in many, many organizations that are very successfully managing the people side of change, or what I refer to as the human dynamic. There are three phases, but I will say they're not linear. That's why I made them circles, is because people can flow back and forth. The three areas are endings, being in that neutral zone, and that circle is very intentionally placed over the abyss, as I call it, and the new beginnings. So the endings are at the very beginning, which is kind of an oxymoron, but it's when we know it's coming. So we're going to suffer some loss and we have to release some of the old ways of thinking and the old ways of doing. One of the strategies that we can do for ourselves and others is storytelling, really recapping some of the celebrations we've had and the meaning of our work and some key stories, and be very compassionate to one another because change is hard. Then in this neutral zone, my very first boss, straight out of college, my first full-time job, she said to me, her name was Olin Hanson Blink, and she said to me, the middle of change always feels like chaos. And that has stuck with me and rung true so many times. I'm working with a team right now. We're about 3 months in to a new process. And when I met with the team last week, many of them were having a lot of strong emotions about, remind me why did we do this again? And man, this is hard. I'm not so sure if it's going to work. So that's what happens in this middle zone is people get confused and disoriented. They become skeptical, maybe a little bit disengaged or apathetic. And so that's how I knew we were in the middle of change. And then Olwen's voice rang through my head. The middle of change feels like chaos. So that was very helpful to me and rings true today. When the change event happens, we're at the new beginning. And we are excited and energized and committed to this new way of doing things. So what we need to do now as leaders is coach and guide and support and check in. One thing I didn't say about the very first phase of endings is how people feel there, and why those stories are so important is it's because people are in a state sometimes of shock and denial and anger and fear. Many of the words that people said when we invited you at the beginning to say what was your word association, so that's pretty normal. And that's why that compassion and storytelling helps. And if when I said that it resonated for you like, sounds like the grief cycle, that there's some definite parallels there. So let's dig a little deeper into each sphere. So the endings that happen in the very beginning of the change. One thing that's really important in strategy here is to lead ourselves through it, this self-leadership, to take stock for ourselves. What are we losing? What are we sad that's ending? Because even when there's happy things, I got a promotion, I'm so excited. But now I'm going to have to supervise my friends. So there's a little loss there. I got a new house, my dream house. I'm so excited. But man, I loved my old neighbors. So even when things are happy and good, we have to understand that that's natural, that people are going to experience some loss. So it's important for us as leaders. And when I say leaders, I mean people of influence. It's not about position or title or status. We need to assess it for ourselves so that when somebody else is pushing back, we don't then go in reverse. that we're ready to be there for them and support them because we've already done our own self-assessment here. So if we were in a larger group for a more expansive time, I would invite you to pick a change and then think about what all those losses were with it. Maybe something in the past, current, or in the future. Because we want to lead ourselves through this process so that we can respond and not go backwards when we're faced with some pushback. Because people will feel a sense of loss around relationships, memberships, affiliation, routine, structure, identity, territory, meaningful work. Well, I was the expert here, and now this new software, people might not come to me, and I won't be as sure of myself. When I was working with an IT vice president, he was really innovative and very forward thinking. It just made sense to him to always push the envelope. And when we talked about this, he was like, "Oh, I never thought about how people will lose their sense of identity, that they are the subject matter expert, and maybe with this new way of doing things, they won't be." It was quite the aha moment. So, in addition to self-leadership, the other piece is compassion. And I love to think of compassion as a skill. Yes, it's a feeling, but it's also a skill. And if we have some boundaries around it, we don't internalize other people's feelings and we can help them and be supportive and compassionate about what they're experiencing. So if we were in a more expansive workshop together, if perhaps I came on site to your company, we might dig into what's the difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion. But it's really important the takeaway here is to think about compassion as both a skill and a feeling. And compassion is recognizing the feeling and doing something about it, sharing information, clarifying what's in it for them, asking more questions so we understand the source of their resistance. So compassion is acknowledging the feeling and taking action. So that's a little bit about endings. Now we move into that neutral zone, that abyss, as I like to call it. And even Stephen Covey says that in change, it is important to minimize the chaos. We're not going to eliminate it, but we want to minimize it. And the way we do that is by being very clear as we can, as black and white as we can, in giving directions about what we do know and what we don't know at this point. We also want to identify what does non-productivity look like? So as we're going through change and working towards the new, if we can identify what non-productive work looks like, then we'll be able to identify, we're feeling the resistance and it's overcoming a little bit. So that's something we can do. Be very clear and then identify what non-productivity looks like. So some questions we want to ask ourselves is what is driving the change and share that with those around us and we remind them. And then a really important question to ask, because we've seen companies go out of business when they have all the resources, all the knowledge, if they don't ask themselves, what happens if we don't change? And then how does the change fit and grow out of the past? So we can connect the dots, we can bridge from the old to the new. And then what are some secondary changes that are to occur? That kind of domino effect. If we do this, then this might impact this, which might impact that. So if we're asking these things, it helps people with the unknown and the uncertainty. And of course, addressing what's in it for the employee. The way we do this is by being clear on here's what we know now and here's what we'll figure out later. Giving feedback and having this ongoing dialogue. We need people to voice their concerns so we can identify the obstacles and address the concern. So there's something called psychological safety, and it's this concept that I can challenge the process. I can ask questions. I can push back, and it's embraced. People are validating my concerns and addressing them. Because if we don't, it can really derail change. So we really want to understand the causes and sources of resistance. If people are resisting and we haven't given them a chance to voice and understand what's in it for them, we're going to hear things like, it's just the flavor of the month. Well, I found a workaround. I'm just kind of going to do it the old way. Or you'll hear, nobody bothered to ask me, so I'm just going to sit this one out. So those are some indicators that people are resisting and their concerns have not been fully addressed. So we want to understand this resistance. We want to understand why people get stuck. So when you think about yourself, when you've experienced change and it's kind of hit you a little sideways in the gut, or you're leading others and influencing others through change, what are some reasons that people resist? Why do they get stuck? Please use the chat. They don't like change. It hasn't been effectively communicated. They have feelings about it. They're fearful. They don't really understand the end in mind. So they don't have a clear picture. They're not educated about the change. They really are, they like their comfort zone. They don't feel respected. They have to relearn something and they're used to the old way. They need more context. They're moving in the wrong direction. They question what their job will be like. Maybe they won't even have a job. So it's been the spin on it hasn't been positive. So already their attitudes are not one of willingness. Muscle memory. That's people backslide because they're just used to doing it a certain way as they've always done it. Those are all great examples about why people get stuck. They lose their sense of self, their sense of world. So disorientation in this neutral zone is very common, and people also are concerned, what if I fail? Not only what if I lose my job, but what if I fail? And if it isn't self-initiated change and it messes up with their routine, all of these things can be very valid reasons for resistance. So having that psychological safe place where people can express their concern and identify that obstacle so that we can um, address them is really important to foster and elicit that dialogue. I can't say that enough so that it doesn't get derailed. There are two techniques that I'm going to breeze through in the interest of time. But again, if we had a workshop, we'd take a deeper dive. One is feel, felt, found. And this is a technique that they even teach at Starbucks. You know, I understand how you feel. I felt that same way. And what I have found is that I have made tough decisions. And so even though there's some uncertainty with this, I trust my ability to make solid decisions. So whatever it might be, feel, felt, found. Another is the 4 R's of resistance. Reframe it, replace it, reinvent it, and release it. So I'll tell a quick story about reframing. I challenge my brain a lot, but I don't always challenge my physical aptitude. And I decided I was going to be in a triathlon. And I got it down to 12 minutes in the pool, which was pretty respectable. In the water, I didn't practice in a live lake. I inhaled water, I choked, I started to panic, and all of a sudden it took me 20 minutes to finish. Now, a 20 minutes swim is still respectable. It's great exercise, but guess what? It put me last out of 600. Completely dead last out of 600 people. So I call a cousin and I'm complaining and about my embarrassment about being last of 600. And he said, Paulette, give me a minute. And he starts typing and he says, you know what? Out of the entire world's population, only 3% even bother to register in some type of triathlon. So all of a sudden I went from being dead last 600 to being the top 3% of the world. And that is reframing, is it's changing our perspective, looking at it from a different lens. It's a great story, but it really did make me feel better. So those are some techniques we can use to help people reorient. The other technique and strategy we can use is just understanding the root cause. Do they need more information? Is it that they need to understand how they fit into the change? How will they succeed? What's in it for them? That's a personal concern. Number 3, is it about how it's going to happen, implementation, or the impact? Does it make a difference that it's worth it? Collaboration, who else do I need to involve? Or refinement, how do we tweak it? So those are some strategies we need to pay attention to. And once we get there, it is about sustaining it and reminding people why it happened and how it's going and checking in what their concerns are. So in summary, William Bridges talks about the endings, the neutral zones, and the new beginnings. And these are the things we need to be doing to influence the human dynamic to bring people with us when we get there. So at the end here, Teresa has a few questions for you. Teresa, to you.
I'm coming. Um,
I was just filling the dead air.
You were. Thank you. Thank you, Paulette. So if you have any questions for Paulette and have some time, I know we're at 3:30. Hang out with us if you're able to, but if you have questions for Paulette, put them in the Q&A box now at the bottom or the chat box and we'll address those. You should also probably see a pop-up poll that will come up on your screen, just a few brief questions to answer for us to evaluate today's session. I also want to let you know that Paulette mentioned it, but this is just a teaser for her full session. Feel free to contact any of us at NICC Business and Community Solutions for information on bringing Paulette into your business and get this full, probably 90-minute, 2-hour training customized to your business. My contact information, I'm going to drop in the chat right now. So feel free to reach out to me for any more information today. So if you could please fill out that poll quick before you hop off. And if you have any questions, we'll wait a minute or so for Paulette to answer those. I'm not seeing any questions, Paulette. And thank you all for joining us today. And thank you very much, Paulette. And
My pleasure.
Yeah. Join us for our next webinar that will be November 11th with Kate Teisberg. Go ahead and register for that if you haven't already. So thank you.